This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On May the 4th, Military History Night was addressed by Sean Livingston, President of the Naval Association of Canada Toronto Branch and a Canadian naval historian. His topic for the evening was HMCS Oakville, a town's flower.
Okay, everybody ready? Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to RCMI Military History Night. My name is Patricia Hind-White. I'm the organizer of this event. This event will be videotaped for educational purposes. Today is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. There will be a question and answer period following this presentation, and I ask you to now mute your mics and turn your camera off and hold the questions until that time. Guest speaker Sean Livingston and his topic, HMCS Oakville, a town's flower. Our speaker is a naval historian, reserve officer, and teacher with a passion for Canadian history. The author of Oakville's Flower, The History of HMCS Oakville, documenting the story of the Second World War corvette named after the town of Oakville. In 2016, he was key to creating a memorial to the ship in Tannery Park, Oakville, as well as personally authoring a commemorative plaque commemorating the town's namesake warship, and instrumental in creating a display of artifacts in Oakville's town hall, along with drafting a narrative sharing the ship's story set to be unveiled November 22. Sean is president of the Naval Association of Canada Toronto Branch and coordinator of the Canadian Naval Tribute Project, a memorial being built at HMCS York, recognizing a diverse and largely uncelebrated group of individuals for the historical contributions and impact they have made to the Royal Canadian Navy. In his spare time, Sean enjoys time with his family, practicing Japanese swordsmanship, playing guitar, camping, canoeing, sailing, exercising, and working on film. He is currently in the process of publishing his next literary work. This lecture focuses on an overview of HMCS Oakville and its connection to the town of Oakville, explaining the importance of preserving our wartime history and how easily it can be forgotten. And now with that, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, a warm welcome, and Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pat, for that nice introduction, and good evening, everyone. May the 4th be with you, even. I'd like to thank the Royal Canadian Military Institute for the invitation to speak with you this evening about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, and a passion I've been pursuing for, oh, good Lord, quite a bit of time since I was in my early 20s. So as we heard tonight, I'm going to focus on, of course, we speak about HMCS Oakville, but I will focus a bit on the ship's connection to the town, its christening, certainly its famous engagement in the Caribbean Sea in 1942 with U-94. But all this as well connects to a kind of my personal connection with Oakville, my history with the ship. And that is being the person who had to rediscover it, uncover it from the annals of time, and where it's quite nearly forgotten. And I think the story of HMCS Oakville, in its own right, it's an important part of Canadian naval history, absolutely. But it also serves as a prime example of the fragility of our history, and just how easily it can be lost. Because in Oakville's case, it very nearly was. And of course, at the end of the presentation, I'll entertain some questions. So let's go ahead and begin this presentation. So I'm going to try to click, hopefully the button here will get there we go. Now it's working. So my journey with HMCS Oakville really started in my second year of university, and it was entirely by circumstance, a chance, if you will. I was taking a course on, of course, Canadian history, and being a young naval reservist, I eagerly wanted to. I proposed that I want to write an essay on the role of the Royal Canadian Navy during the Second World War. It was a 20-page paper. And I quickly realized that I had bit off way more than I can choose, and I certainly had to narrow the scope of my essay. It's impossible to do in 20 pages correctly. But while I was doing researching, I came across an index of ships that were part of the Royal Canadian Navy during the Second World War, and my eye noticed that one was called Oakville, and it stood out to me because I was a resident of the town of Oakville. And I had no idea. I was like, wait a minute, I've lived in Oakville since I was a teenager. I was even a sea cadet for a bit of time, and I had no idea that there was a ship named after the town. And as a naval reservist, at that point in time, I was part of HMCS York. I was like, well, geez, I think I want to know a little bit more about this. Now, unlike today, you didn't find a whole bunch. It wasn't easy to find information about the ship, and a cursory kind of glance or investigation, it didn't bring up a lot. So the following, for instance, is a prime example of what you typically got, and I copied and pasted from a source that I even got at that time. HMCS Oakville was a Flower-class corvette that served during the Second World War. It was commissioned November 18th, 1941, skipping the christening in Oakville, by the way. And on the 28th of August, 1942, it engaged in its sunk U-94 in the Caribbean Sea. It was decommissioned, skipping right to the end, on the 20th of July, 1945, sold to the Venezuelan Navy, recommissioned as the Patria. That's pretty much all you got. I mean, some sources would, go a little bit further and specify that Oakville rammed the U-boat, usually plural, singular, just once. And might say that the crew managed to capture it before, board it and capture it before it sank. And then, of course, you got that obligatory, here's the stats of a Flower-class corvette, and that was it. That was all I could really find. And I wasn't able to get much more, but I got busy, I had to get assignments done, and it kind of went into the back of my mind. I wouldn't come across it again until my final year of undergraduate studies. I was taking a course at the University of Toronto. It was called Spectacle, Crowds, and Parades in Canada. And we had to write an essay on a little known, or preferably completely unknown, Canadian public spectacle. That was our final assignment. I hadn't a clue what the heck I was going to do. And I can't quite remember how, but I found myself talking to Ed Stewart. And Ed Stewart was a longtime resident of the town of Oakville. He's president of the HMCS Athabascan Society. My brother Bill died on Athabascan. And certainly very knowledgeable in naval lore. And he played a big part in the publication Unlucky Lady, the life and death of HMC Athabascan. And so I was talking to him, and he's like, hey, how are things going, kid? And I was like, well, that's really tough assignment I have to do, and I have no idea what I'm going to write it on. And I told him what it was, and he kind of looked at me and said, well, why don't you write it about the christening of HMCS Oakville? I remember the name. I was like, oh, right, there's a ship named after the town, right? And he says, yeah, it was christened in the town of Oakville. And again, I tilted my head and went, really? Wow. And that kind of put a hook in my mouth, and I chomped in, and I wanted to know more, but it was incredibly challenging to find that information. So what really followed was an incredible amount of research on my part, and it was following breadcrumbs, and I found one clue led to another, and it kind of just became its own, like the momentum kind of took me, and I just and I started unlocking an incredibly interesting story, finding images. The town actually had original images from the christening, but they in a historical society, but they had no captions, no information. They don't know where anything was. It's a box of pictures, originals. And I started getting information of all of it, figuring out who the people were, what actually happened on that day, and the story of just the christening alone kind of blew my mind. So I did my essay on that, and the town of library head librarian kind of figured out that I was doing this, so they wanted a copy of it, and they put it in their archives. And then the museum got sense of this, Oakville Museum, and they wanted to create an exhibit on this, which I took part in. We had an initial one, and we had a large one for the centennial of the Navy. But I continued, and I really focused this essay on not just the ship, but and its christening, but its connection to the town. And behind all of it was, I can't believe it was forgotten. I called the essay Oakville's Forgotten Fame. And I'll explain that a little bit in just a moment. And I continued researching. I found not just the christening. I did more and more and more. This GIF here is getting kind of annoying when you click it. And to make a long story short, I eventually uncovered this incredible story, and the thing is that no one in the town knew anything about it. I would walk up. I did a random study. I remember some years ago, well before the publication of my book, I started walking down to people down the street on Lakeshore in Oakville, where the downtown core is, and I randomly would stop people and ask them if they knew anything about HMCS Oakville. And of course, I learned quickly, don't use HMCS Oakville, because no one had a clue what HMCS stood for. Her Majesty's Canadian Ship, or His Majesty's Canadian Ship, it would have been at the time. They certainly didn't get it. So I stopped doing that. I just said, did you know there's a World War II ship named after the town? And people didn't. And it wasn't just the regular passerby, officials didn't know. Eventually I find myself again talking to Ed Stewart, and he looks at me and he says, "It's all you, kid." I said, what's all me, Ed? I'm not sure what you're talking about. He says, "Oakville, this ship." He says, "You got to tell its story." He says, "Listen," he says, "if you don't," he says, "like, you and I are probably the only ones to know anything really significant about it and have all this information. And if you don't, it's going to completely vanish." And, and I got this image here of a work party mustered near one of the depth charge stores. It's covered right now on aboard Oakville. And I just, this sense of responsibility really kind of hit me. And it's almost like these faces were looking right at me and like, what are you going to do? You're gonna let everyone forget about us? Like, oh, geez. Naval officer at this point in time, a history teacher, and I'm like, I can't do this. So what I'm going to do today is talk about probably a very different picture than what I found at that time when I first tried looking up information about Oakville. It's one that doesn't lack the character or feeling and the importance that the ship played, not just in our nation, but exposing the deep roots this ship had with its namesake community, and they were very closely connected. So I'm going to talk first about the christening before I move on to the battle, and because the christening actually foreshadows quite a bit of what's to come. Wonderful picture of Lakeside Park, November 5th, 1941, around 2:00, and that's Oakville in the distance. The amount of people that were at this event was, the camera, if it was able to pan left, if there was a picture was panning right, it'd be just as packed. This is Lakeside Park. It branches down. There's a hill that goes to the waterfront. People all along it. It was quite a spectacle. And by all accounts from the newspapers, well over 2,000 people, and individuals, not even people from the town of Oakville, came to Oakville to see this. Interestingly, it seems very well that this is the largest christening of a warship of a Canadian warship during the Second World War. I can't find one that comes anywhere near. And part of that is because eventually the Navy said, you're not doing these large spectacles anymore because of concerns for security. And so a lot of them became very muted affairs. So Oakville happens just at the right time. Also, not only did all the newspapers across Canada report on little Oakville and what was going on here, the New York Times and the London Times had articles about this as well, which I found just blew my mind. And the more I dug, the more surprised and confused I became that this was forgotten. And how did this vanish from the town's collective mind? So let's go through it just a little bit. Of course, there's more detail of everything I'm going to talk about in the book. To the left here, we have Rear Admiral Percy Nellis, and to the right, we have the Honorable Angus L. MacDonald, Minister of Defense for Naval Affairs, both in Toronto prior to boarding HMCS Oakville. It actually came, into the lake. It stopped at Toronto, and from Toronto, it was going to pick up some people, including some school children. I'll talk about that in a moment, and then continue to Oakville and arrive for 2 o'clock. Both of these individuals have made their mark, if you say, on Canadian history, and certainly on Canadian naval history, and they're focused on there. Big fans of each other, but I guess that's they managed to work together, and it's a little bit beside the point right now. What I've got here is now the ship's underway, and so each of the schools in the district, elementary and high school, one student was selected by their peers for quite an honor to be shuttled down in the morning of the event on November 5th and brought to Oakville, and they attended with obviously the crew and these notable dignitaries for the trip all the way down to Oakville. So there, these are images of the school children that were there on this event, which is a really neat thing to be able to do. More pictures of school children with some senior ratings aboard the vessel. Interesting enough, like this is at part of the ceremony when they're in Oakville, and this is actually Percy Nellis is inspecting a contingent of the Royal Australian Air Force that happened to be in Oakville. Oakville had some Percy military quarters, and it was an area used for some training. And just so happened there's some Australians that were there. And one thing I love about the image is the further back you look into the photo. I'm not sure if my cursor shows anything. The further back you look into here and people in uniform, like you really get the sense of just like how big an event and how packed this was. There's no picture that seems to really properly capture the whole thing. Oakville had to anchor offshore because of the draft and wasn't able to pull up right to the jetty. So they used this boat launch Esperanza to ferry them back and forth. It's a podium that's here. It was recorded. There was a radio. It was covered on the radio. There was they had speeches. They had a choir that was set up, not here, but to the side, that was singing. There was a fly past aircraft that went overhead to honor it. There was like several march pasts like on the road and parades. The festivities went into the evening. There's presentation of gifts to the crew. Comforts for the sailors, but even swap bells. They took the original bell off Oakville and they presented one from the town. They had a dinner. There was dancing. It was a big affair. They went all out on it. Here's that's the mayor right there, and here's the mayor's wife, who provided the honors for christening the vessel. And she actually this photo, she actually said Godspeed and fair sailing to all those who serve in her, just before stopping for the photo and then breaking the bottle against the freshly painted hull. This is the first commanding officer of HMCS Oakville. This is Alex C. Jones, addressing the crowd. Interesting enough, we have a really neat artifact that came at a museum, and that we part of a new exhibit that belonged to Jones that came not too long ago. I could talk about that later on during the question if someone's curious. Part of the parade that they did, and I find this one's always an interesting image here of a Legion member from the First World and veteran of the First World War marching in the parade. More images of the parade here. This is actually not Oakville's crew. This is either members of HMCS York or Star marching in a parade. It's not from a former Yorker. I'm going to say it's Yorkers. I have, with the gifts, and this is actually one of the students that was on, with the junior ranks, posing for a photo in a hammock during the travel to Oakville. At the very end of the evening, the mayor of Oakville, Murray F. Deans, he's known as Doc Deans because he was a dentist by trade, so everyone referred to him as Doc Deans. And he did something to the delight of the entire town. He officially adopted the officers and crew as honorary citizens of the town of Oakville. And he did it on the fly. He didn't really ask permission from, so it took Percy Nellis and MacDonald a little bit off. And I'll explain to you why it would have thrown him off in just a moment. There's a nice shot of Oakville in the Caribbean that I used for the cover of my book. The interesting thing here is that HMCS Oakville is a Flower class corvette. And Deans went so far to say, well, this is now the town's flower. This is our flower. And this is why I call the book Oakville's Flower, because it was often, from that point on, it was commonly referred to during the Second War as our flower. You know, it's Oakville's flower. They took complete ownership of it. You know, RCN's policy is that, you know, I often get asked, did anyone from the town of Oakville actually serve aboard Oakville? And the answer is no, and because the Navy policy was, you don't do that. You can't serve on your namesake ship. And the reason for that is, you know, in the unfortunate case and very realistic case and probable one possibly, that it was sunk. It'd be kind of it would doubly hurt, if you will, the community, you know, because not only did you lose your namesake warship, but you also lost members of your community on it too. So they made it a rule you're not supposed to do it. But then Deans went ahead and just pretty much adopted, you know, made every sailor aboard Oakville a citizen of Oakville, and it just kind of like changed it all like that a little bit. But this is more part of the reason why I found it so surprising that they forgot. And Deans went a little step further. There's just an image of Oakville as you get a sense of, you know, it's a way, you know, based off of whaler design, doesn't have much of a keel at all here, right? So it's not a comfortable ship. Known as wet and lively ships, right? They, you know, water gets in pretty much everywhere, and the only place dry is if you're in a boiler room, and bounces like a cork on water. And as many sailors at the time would say, it would roll even on wet grass. So it's not super comfortable. But Deans over here, he has a gun shield they were doing for it, which is not an official badge, but will later kind of become an official badge for Oakville. He actually said that this is a day that Oakville will never forget. And this is the largest public spectacle in Oakville's history, and the most significant thing or notable thing in its history, and something that will always be in the annals of the town's. Well, but they forgot. And they forgot pretty easily. And I was always like, and I'm like, why? How did you forget so easily? I'll get to that. He also said something else of note. He said that everyone in the district would be awaiting word of the exploits of the adopted crew and ship, end quote. It's interesting that he said that, because less than a year later, Oakville would more than deliver on that expectation. That's the gun shield that they're posing with the image, as we use in one of our exhibits right there. So it's still one of the artifacts that exists. So allow me to paint the picture of what Oakville does less than a year later. So, you know, from Oakville, she goes to Montreal. She's commissioned in Montreal. Lady Mountbatten actually happens to be there. Oakville you know, corvettes are the dowdy corvette's not really much of a looker of a vessel. It's pretty small. It's the most common vessel that you're going to find in the Royal Canadian Navy. Cheap and nasty, as Churchill called them, right? And cheap for the Allies and the British to make, and nasty on the enemy. And they're not comfortable, as I said, you know, for the sailors to be on them. You know, they're not particularly, they don't stand out much compared to other vessels. And yet Oakville seems to, there's something just about Oakville that just draws this stuff to her. Anyways, this is actually an image of Oakville in the Caribbean Sea, and it's in the Caribbean Sea that while escorting convoys down there, that Oakville is going to have its very legendary encounter and become a legend of the Royal Canadian Navy. So allow me to give you a bit of a background on that fateful night of August 27th to 28th, 1942. Now, this is not an image of the time, and it's kind of hard to have images of this battle, especially at night. HMCS Oakville was escorting convoy TAW 15. That's Tango Alpha Whiskey, and that stands for Trinidad Aruba Key West. That's kind of the code for the route they're doing, and the 15th convoy to be doing this. It's making 8 knots under a cloudy sky. Now, unlike this image that you're looking on the screen right now, It was a full moon that night, but the cloud cover was actually quite dense. And so it was preventing the full moon and the light of the full moon to come onto the water. And of course the convoy, so it's pitch black outside. The convoy, of course, none of the lanterns are lit, they have blackout curtains, you don't want anything, like the rules are pretty are strict, because any spark of light, and a U-boat can see it. Imagine keeping watch in conditions like that, trying to straining your eyes, your lenses and binoculars, and trying to scan the horizon you can't even probably see, in the hopes that and have your ears open for anything that can be an indication that the enemy is out there. And the enemy was out there, and they actually even knew the enemy was out there. And a full moon is a moonless kind of night, or is not a friend to the convoy. When you put it that way, it certainly is an ally and helps the enemy out. So originally, the convoy is made up of 29 ships under the command of American destroyer USS Leah. That's the ship there. There also was, the rest of the escorts were corvettes. You had Halifax and you had Snowberry. There was a Dutch gunboat, and there was 3 U.S. Navy aircraft, PBYs, that were part of this, and of course Oakville certainly was a part of it as well. And the convoy is first headed west to Aruba, where I met some oil tankers, and then oil is really from the Caribbean is really what it's bringing. Before it moved to Jamaica to meet with some more ships. And then from there, they went to Guantanamo Bay. They merged with yet another convoy. And then and the idea was they were to head to New York, where Oakville would then cease its escort duties and start doing another escort duty. And it would then become probably an HX or a different kind of, I don't know if it's a fast convoy, but it would have been a different convoy. That was the original plan, at least. You can see there seems to be an easy way to get out of there, to Windward Passage, and which is that strait in the Caribbean Sea between Cuba and Hispaniola. And U-94, U-boat 94 under command of Otto Letts is there, and sure enough, spots the convoy on the surface and radios its position to another 3 U-boats. And now the Wolfpack is aware, and it's starting to do what it does. He's gonna trail it, and the other ones are gonna come in, and they're gonna convene and circle around it. Now when U-94, so there we go, U-94 somewhere over here. Now when U-94, not a great image of when it's launching there, it's a little pixelated, but that is U-94. Those transmissions actually were intercepted by the Allies. Problem is they didn't know how to decode it at this point in time yet. So they knew U-boats were there, and they sent message word to the convoy that, well, sounds like U-boats are chattering. They're in the area. Be on high alert. Good luck. There's not much more that you can certainly do at that point in time. So Oakville, another shot of it in the Caribbean at this point in time. It's like it's got its dazzle paint on it, camouflage, and it's certainly got strong signs of the rust and everything, and the effects of having been at sea for just a little bit. The waters at this point in time in the evening were force 4 with swells. And so it's uncomfortable, and the ship's bobbing along. Oakville's guarding the port quarter of the convoy. And it's hot too, by the way. There's like no wind. Pretty much, it's very stale. Sorry, there's a bit of wind, but it's stale. It's humid, muggy. These corvettes don't have air conditioning. Most of the sailors have stripped themselves down like to just their shorts, without even shoes, just to try to deal with the heat. It was quite uncomfortable, and the entire convoy in Oakville as well are zigzagging on course 351. And just after midnight, U-94, it seems the U-boats are in position. U-94 makes the first move and starts to creep slowly on the surface into the convoy. So he's surfaced, and he's it's a small silhouette, can't really be seen, and he takes his sweet time creeping into the convoy, passing the escorts, and trying to get into a position where he can attack the merchant ships. But by 10 after 1 in the morning, something happens that's unfavorable for him. That full moon I was talking about that was obscured by the clouds, well, the clouds start to part. And that full moon now is a light comes out completely and right down and reflecting off the water. Now, for Oakville and the other escorts, they still can't see U-94. It's and they haven't spotted any U-boat. Again, their silhouette is so small with the waves, it's really hard to differentiate them in the dark. But for one of the PBYs that's flying overhead, all of a sudden the shape of a U-boat really stands out on the surface of the water. And it just so happened, probably this PBY here does not hesitate. He recognizes what he sees and he immediately dives. PBY, by the way, if you're just patrol bomber, and Y is just the manufacturing code. So everyone always asks, what's a Y stand for? It's just the manufacturing code. It's patrol bomber, an amphibious aircraft, as you can see, and it dives right on the surface at U-94. That's not U-94, but just to give you an idea. At 2:57 in the morning is when this happens. U-94 at this point has made it by several escorts, everyone but pretty much Oakville, and the PBY spots and Auto S hasn't actually encountered an attack from the sky yet, and he does realize that it's coming, and he orders his boat to dive, but not before the PBY is able to drop depth bombs and they explode. And although they didn't really quite, it's arguable how much damage they actually even did to U-94 at this point in time, not a whole bunch. Still big explosion. It certainly caught the attention of the escorts, and the closest escort was HMCS Oakville. Another image of Oakville in the Caribbean here, by the way. So Oakville sees the explosion and then, of course, notices that there's the PBY circling around and flashing the Aldous lamp SSS, which is, there's a, it pretty much code for saying that there is a U-boat on the surface here that's been spotted. And the commanding officer of HMCS Oakville right now is Clarence King, Lieutenant Commander Clarence King. He's actually a veteran from the First World War, served in Q ships, and they already had a Distinguished Service Cross from the First World War for some actions in there. And let me just put it, he's not a novice. He knows he's actually he's been to sea before, and he understands, and he doesn't hesitate. And he immediately orders his ship to make for the location of where they believe the U-boat to be, and he also orders the ship to ready some depth charge patterns. So, of course, U-94, tries to submerge, right? And but not before Oakville, and it does. It starts to submerge, but Oakville manages to see the froth on the surface of the bubbling of it going down, goes over top, drops a pattern of depth charges. And depth charges, just give you an idea, their explosions are something pretty fierce. And so, and the explosion rattles Auto S. That's Clarence King, by the way, just give you an idea of, he's not aboard Oakville there, I believe, but he's an old hand, and he knows what he's doing. And the explosion rattles U-94. It forces it to come back up to the surface. He's not able. He's damaged. It's actually damaged the vessel, the boat, and he's not able to safely submerge anymore. So he's kind of stuck, and he's going to have to, if anything, he's back to the surface, and he's going to have to fight it off on the surface, right? He's got no choice. So he's exposed. So Oakville, meanwhile, readies another pattern of depth charges, and King then received word from a lookout that a U-boat's been spotted, because he had to come back to the surface, like off the port bow, like not even 200 yards away. And so, and in that moment, King decides to do something pretty risky. Hal Lawrence, who's who's pretty famous himself, a sub-lieutenant on a ship here at this point in time, always said that King was a bit of a real fire eater, and wasn't afraid to get into conflict. Corvette hulls are not meant to be used as weapons, and they're quite thin, and he makes the move to ram it. And you have to understand that larger vessels have already done this tactic and have been lost due to the damage sustained as a result of doing it. But I suppose King felt that it was his only option. That he didn't realize that U-94 was unable to submerge again. certainly safely. And so he felt it was the quickest thing he could do. He had to get this U-boat, and it was worth the risk. And so that's certainly what he did. Now, as it happened, it proved to be insufficient sea room to perform the maneuver. And so instead of actually ramming U-94, Oakville kind of just passes along and scrapes right across the U-boat, hull against hull, and screeching, into the night, and passes off. As they break apart, Oakville's guns open up on the U-boat and start peppering it with machine gun fire. Actually, King was standing too close to one of the guns off the bridge and had to like jump to the other side. He nearly got shot by one of the very eager gunners. But once again in position, Oakville turned about and set itself again to ram. And this time, all the guns open up on the U-boat. Now, Alouette orders his. So Oakville's coming down, starting to bear down again on the U-boat. And Alouette orders his gunnery crew to come out and ready the 88 millimeter deck gun, because it's pretty much in return fire. It's the only thing he has to defend himself. But unfortunately, Oakville is already firing on him, so the gunners get completely cut down by Oakville's machine guns, who just rake U-94's deck with gunfire. And then gunner Reg Adams fires 1 4-inch shell that knocks U-94's 88 millimeter deck gun clear off the deck, which is an incredible feat considering that it's at night, force 4, the waves, and he just nails one shot and takes it clear off. And that's a hell of a shot. And whether it was skill or luck or a bit of both, he was still in the newspapers when they eventually covered this. He was hailed as the best gun in the Navy. As a last-ditch attempt to avoid being hit, U-94 quickly moves at the last second. And again, this results in Oakville missing the boat, but not before Oakville drops another pattern of depth charges, and the explosion, which was vicious, rattles both vessels. At this point in time, something very unique and interesting to the story of HMCS Oakville happens. There were some stokers that were off duty, standing near, trying to get some to cool off, and they're standing near Oakville's funnel, where it just so happened the canteen kept empty bottles of Coca-Cola, and they just start grabbing the Coca-Cola bottles and pelting the U-boat that they see right there. They were kind of surprised. They came out, oh, U-boat's right there, and they just start pelting it. And the XO eventually sees them and redirects them and tells them, go get arm yourself with rifles or something. This is a little silly. Certainly a lot of gusto, it represents kind of Oakville's gusto. Anyways, go for the third time now in ramming attempt here. Oakville, runs out again, turns about, and this time, like a bull in rage, comes down, and U-94, especially that last stuff charge, it's not moving. Diving planes are damaged. It's stuck in the water. And at 3:45 in the morning, Oakville strikes true. You can see this was not a painting of Oakville striking U-94, but a horrible attempt to try to make it look like it's U-178. Also, not the right time of the day, and that's where they should be hitting, not there. But yeah, just behind the Connie Towers where it rammed, and it was it dug deep into the U-boat's hull, made a massive gash. Steel biting into steel, screeching, and the sound just carried through both vessels and into the night of steel on steel. Oakville eventually pushes over the U-boat, kind of forces it down a bit of its weight, and then and underneath it, and then and this move really damaged Oakville. Oakville's actually taking on water now, and then it pulls away. The crew cheers, most of the crew not realizing that the damage to their own vessel, but certainly U-94 is crippled, and it's a decisive hit. King then quickly turns to Sub-Lieutenant Hal Lawrence. He says, come on, Lawrence, get cracking, and he orders Hal Lawrence to get a boarding party going. And Hal Lawrence gets Stoker Petty Officer Arthur Powell with them, and they get a boarding party together. Whoopsie, let me go back one. There we go. That is to the left. That's Hal Lawrence, and that's Stoker Arthur Petty Officer later on after this event. Now Lawrence is just wearing his he's wearing his shorts. He's got like a gun belt on and nothing else, because again it's really hot, and the May Wef life vest. Arthur Powell's pretty much in the same attire. They muster near the 4-inch gun, which had stopped firing at this point in time, but the reason they stopped firing is because they had a gun jam. And unfortunately, while Lawrence is trying to prep his team, he realizes too late that the gunners had managed to get rid of the jam, and were firing another round. And by the time he told everyone to get clear, it was too late. The gunshot went off, and concussive blow pretty much knocked everyone except Powell unconscious. And the next thing Lawrence remembers is just Powell's on top of him, waking him up. He's like, "Sir, like we got to go. The U-boat's here." So they go to the side of Oakville. They see the U-boat. It's just the two of them, no one else. And Lawrence says it's like in one of his memoirs, like Pirates of the Caribbean, and they jump down, and it's a decent drop from the deck of a corvette to that of a U-boat, which is pretty low to the surface. And unfortunately for Hal Lawrence, he lands right heel on the deck of the U-boat. Sounds like a jolt of electricity, as he says, right up into his teeth. And unfortunately, the weak elastic of his shorts gives way at this point of time, and his shorts drop down to his ankles. He trips on him, and he goes over the side of the U-boat. And then promptly a swell pushes him right back on. But he, aside from his gun belt and his Mae West, he's debriefed, if you will. He's naked. He's entirely naked, and that's it, gun, naked. They got no time to really do anything about this because a lot of this German sailors at the point in time, this is one of the propaganda posters at the time to talk about later, are trying to exit the vessel. Two Germans exit from a hatch, that's near them, while others come up from aft. And instinctively, very quickly, Lawrence pistol whips the first one over the side, and the second sailor just jumps in after his mate. I guess he just, the whole point is just wants nothing to do with this. At this point, Oakville's pulling away, and it's just the two of them now. They rush the conning tower, and unfortunately, on their bare feet, the bits of broken glass from the Coke bottles the stokers had chucked are now digging into their feet, and that's not so fun. Two Germans bolt from out of the bridge. Lawrence motions them to go back down, and when they don't respond, he shoots one of them, while Powell shoots the other one. And then Lawrence orders Powell to guard the bridge, and he proceeds out the back. He's worried about that hatch in the back, and someone's going to come sneak him from behind and attack. He drops a grenade down there and moves off, and it explodes. And unfortunately, the sound seemed to really, alert Oakville's crew, and the gunners start opening up on the U-boat again. This forces Powell to go down on the deck, and Lawrence has to go off to the side of, pretty much go back into the water, cursing the gunners and everything else like that. Who promptly the firing stops. I'm pretty sure King was yelling at them to cease firing. And then he makes his way back to the hatch, and they then try to coach the crew out, which now they don't want to move because there's this naked guy that's Canadian trying to tell him to come out, and he just shot a few of them. So I always love it. Lawrence says he tries to pull on his Celtic charm and encourage him to come up. Eventually they get him up. He gets Powell to take him down to the deck and guard him. Lawrence goes into, now you have to understand, the diving planes are gone. U-94 is rolling. He goes into, the lights are out. He goes into the vessel trying to get codes and everything intel he can get. This is a very brave and incredibly risky, dangerous thing to do. He gets into the vessel. The water's like oil and everything mixed in there. It's it starts at his knees, and before he knows it's up to his chest, and he's wading through there quite a bit. And when he gets up to his chest, he's like, I gotta go. I'm gonna go down with this thing. And he hurries back. He gets up the hatch just in time. They all go into the water and manage to escape just before U-94 is succumbs to a woman and sinks. He ends up reporting to the U.S. destroyer. This is great. He reports nude. The Americans, he's worried about sharks apparently in the water, and so he pushes past the Germans. He gets up, first onto the vessel, and he's like, gangway, not everyone, make way for an officer. We all can't be saved. But the Americans start, who are you? They don't believe he's an officer. He's this naked guy, and they're like, don't you start holding him to arrest him, thinking he's maybe even a German sailor. And it's Powell that manages to convince him, no, he's an officer. He reports to the captain of the U.S. destroyer naked, who very graciously offers him a hot coffee, a sandwich, some clothes, a shower, and the clothes. Powell heads back to Oakville. Anyways, they momentarily captured it. This is the crew of HMCS Oakville that was, and was the crew of Oakville when U-94 was engaged. Just give you an idea of how important and how unique this event is. At the end of the day, one Distinguished Service Order was awarded, one Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, and 6 mentioned in dispatches. That is a lot of awards for the Royal Canadian Navy to award to a single crew of a ship for one incident. It's quite unique, and it really gives you an idea of just how unique this was. And Oakville, back in Oakville again, you got Lawrence and Powell being, they're all over the place. Here they are again at a dinner of deans, and here they are, they're visiting Port Arthur, where Oakville was built, and the people that are making ships. They went to New York, they met the mayor, they went on a whole public speaking tour. Oakville, and yet, despite all this history, and now that it became this legend, it did this thing. By the end of the Second World War, the memory of it gradually just started to fade. At one point, Mayor Harry Barrett, who was himself a veteran of the Second World War, tried to reach out to the Venezuelan Navy, because when Oakville was paid off again, she was purchased by the Venezuelan Navy and recommissioned Patria, served for about 10 years. Barrett tried to see if he could be repatriated, but the Venezuelan Navy didn't really have an answer. They didn't know what happened to Patria, Oakville. And the best they said is like, well, it's probably scrapped. And then the memory just kind of, faded for the most part. The Legion did put up a cairn in Tannery Park. Tannery Park back then was just a hill of grass, really. There's really not a walkway or path to get to it. And it's a laudable event, but if you look at the plaques, it's to commemorate the officers and crew of HMCS Oakville, 1942 to 45. It misses its christening and commissioning date, 41. They served in Canada's time of need. Well, listen, if you're not a Navy type and you don't have any military history behind you, how are you going to know what that means? You don't even know what HMCS is, and they served in the crew. Maybe you're going to guess a ship, but there's actually quite a bit about that. I'm like, it's not enough. It was interesting that Lincoln Alexander was there to unveil it. That was certainly something. But let me tell you something, the local paper at the time, they posted this image and they completely ignored a fellow over here with the Distinguished Service Medal. This is Arthur Powell, one of the guys that boarded the thing. And they didn't even mention him. They had no idea he was even there during that event. That's how much it is, it had already slipped from everyone's mind. And after this event, it's gone. Right? Until pretty much this. Me bringing it back. Now the town's quite rallying behind it, and they love the history, and it's beautiful to see. But I was the one that brought it back. I'm shocked by that. It's not something I think that ever should have happened. This is Tannery Park, so that image you're seeing up at the top here, that's the plaque I created. The spire's missing here. This galley looks out to where Oakville was commissioned. And on the flip side of this, you're facing the other way. You would notice that the cairn, and there's a pathway now around it. This explains the history of Oakville. We had quite a big ceremony for that. And at QE Park Community and Cultural Center, we're actually going to have a permanent exhibit with some of its artifacts. And one of the most famous artifacts of the ship has finally been lost for over 40 years. It's finally been found. I'm quite happy about that. If you're interested in more details of this, I certainly encourage you. I went very quickly through it. Right. And this is just a cursory glance. There are details of this I did not get into, and I can't. There's just too many. There's too much pages. There's too much research. But there's a lot more in this, and I certainly encourage you to pick up a copy if you're interested in naval history and you want to know more. This is certainly an important part of our naval history. So at this point in time, there's tons of things I could certainly talk about, but I'd like to turn it over to people. I'm at around 46 minutes now, so that's just when I'm supposed to do this, for questions.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, now's your time. Any questions? Well, you certainly covered a lot of ground there, Sean.
I tried, but it's
Succeeded.
Yeah.
Yeah. All I can say is, wow, a truly outstanding presentation.
Hopefully, I didn't overwhelm anybody with it.
Thrilling, descriptive, and really the importance of preserving the history. Otherwise, it is forgotten. Now, it looks like we've got a question in the chat. Let me see what they're saying. From Don Levers, very well done. Thanks for the history lesson.
Cheers. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Good. Any more questions? I think you've just bowled everybody over. They're just up.
I don't know.
Yeah. My gosh. Well, last chance for questions. No, I guess there isn't any.
That happens sometimes, right? So, and there's plenty of information in the book that, of course, I didn't cover. This image I'll speak to. Even actually, this is during the Naval Centennial celebrations, and there's me as a young lieutenant, and Glenn Wolfrey, if anyone knows him, over here. And this tree is actually planted in honor of HMCS Oakville, and so it's just one of the many things that we were doing for that have happened to commemorate the vessel as a part as a result of the work I was doing.
Yeah. Now I've got another question here from Tony Hopkins.
Mhm.
Prisoners from the U-boat.
Yes. There were quite a bit of prisoners that were taken from the U-boat. Most of them went to the American destroyer. Oakville picked up several of them as well, but then brought them after. In the book, there's actually a picture of some of them aboard Oakville. And one of the greatest things that's interesting is that there's even an account that someone of going by. There's an image of some of them being captured right here in the book. But there's even an Otto Etz. He's one of the soldiers, one of the sailors recognizes him, and of course he has his iron cross around his neck that he had earned, and so that stands out. And he kind of looks at the Canadians, and he kind of goes back, and he makes this comment. He says, "Oh," he says, in broken English, he says, "Are all you Canadians such fine, sturdy chaps?" Kind of impressed by the size. He was taken back a bit by the Canadians. But Otto Etz actually, after I can say I focus on Otto Etz, and the book actually looks at the German perspective as well. I found information from them, so I got the American, I've got the Canadian, of course, and I've got the German sources as well to try to make a complete picture of that event. And Otto Etz, after the war, he actually continues with the German Navy, and he actually has some correspondence he actually does with some of the veterans of Oakville. It's interesting how they and the minute they were captured, it seems like they were just like, well, that's it, like we're captured, we did our part, and it's like some of the sailors even felt like they were relieved.
Now I've got a couple more questions coming in.
Perfect.
Where did the Oakville serve for the rest of the war? That's from Michael Clary.
So Oakville then continued very shortly after the event with U-94. She actually goes to get refitted in Galveston, Texas, to have her forecastle extended, which is, you can always look at a picture of Oakville, depending on where the mast is positioned. It's always a good hint of before, if the forecastle has been extended or not. And then after that, she pursues back up north and does a triangle run pretty much, and then escorts convoys heading to England. She has another incident where she's called out to engage a U-boat in horrific weather that significantly pounded and damaged the ship, and forced Oakville and the other ones to relinquish the report. And then there's also an incident where a random torpedo was fired at Oakville, and it missed. But it's a weird thing. But Oakville never, of course, like she does her duty and she serves with escorts until the end of the war, but never again having an incident quite like U-94, which again is, that's an odd thing for a ship of the Second World War to have an incident like that to begin with.
Now, from Tony Hopkins, any damage to the Oakville, and sail by self or towed?
She was offered a tow, but she was actually, they were able to close enough of the hatches to, and watertight compartments to keep the water as it was. There was an issue with one of the Scotch boilers, and one of the metals, distinguished service, metals actually went to Stoker, who had to go above one of the Scotch boilers and manually let out the steam, and nearly cooked himself because it was too much pressure and they couldn't release it. But she was able to limp back essentially on her own and allow the convoy to continue. I don't think the convoy would have stopped her anyways, but she made it back with her damages, and she was significantly damaged. And the interesting thing is that some of the veterans of Oakville that I interviewed, and one of them particularly, he joined Oakville just after this, and he saw Oakville in Galveston, Texas, and I asked him, what was it like when you saw Oakville? He said, I thought it looked like a piece of crap. I was taken back. I was kind of hoping to hear like some sort of great thing. He says, oh no, let me clarify. It's like, it was rusty, it was horrible. It was like, it's not what I was expecting. It was really lackluster. So then I start noticing all the damage on it, and I was like, oh right. Like, at this point in time, people knew about because they kept it quiet for a while until like the fall. They only released to the public that this event had happened, and that moment he realized, okay, the damage is actually these war wounds that this vessel has. And then he kind of made a comment. He says, well, I mean, I guess it's as good as any then if it survived this. And he actually served in Oakville for the rest of the war.
Now I've got another question here from David Tilsley.
Yeah.
Hal Lawrence's book, A Bloody War, that talks about this and other events. Can you mention anything about that?
Hal Lawrence is, yeah, he's got 3 books, right? And I'm looking back right here because I have them all, right? And he writes 3 books, and he mentions Oakville in every single one of them. Interestingly enough, though, as his books continue, he just starts to refer to Arthur Powell as the petty officer, which drives me nuts. But yeah, Oakville's, so his accounts were, I certainly looked at them for this, but the thing I really looked at was his interview with the Navy directly right after when he made an investigation. That was the one I put the most credibility in. And his accounts later on, they change a little bit. They're not always consistent. And so I focus on that, and even some of the inconsistencies I mentioned in the book itself. I'm not sure if I've answered the question. Was there more detail you wanted about Lawrence? Actually, I have a pennant that from his widower that it was a personal one of his that he gifted.
Now, there's another thing here from Gregory Barker. He wants to know, can I access a recording of this presentation? I would like to post a link to my local Sea Cadet Corps website. Would it be permissible? Yes, certainly. If you can email RCMI or myself or Eric Moore, well, RCMI, and we can arrange to have it, recording sent to you. Now, the other thing, Tony Hopkins, boarding party, great example of confusion, chaos, of actual warfare.
Yes. Yeah, nothing works the way that you would think so. And again, an entire boarding party was pretty much unconscious. And by the time they woke up, where's the petty officer and the sir? They were gone already. And the U-boats, and it's just the 2 of them. And one of them's naked. Which is what a great little bit of naval history, like, the naked Canadian aboard a U-boat. They managed to capture and subdue the crew. But yeah, you're right. It's a perfect example of just the messiness and the confusion of what they did was incredibly brave. But I don't think they had much time to even digest it. No. And they were there, and it kind of just, and then after the fact, they really had to kind of just put it together. And Lawrence does talk quite a bit about his experience. Powell, after his interview, Powell's very humble. He just keeps himself, and that's part of the reason why that newspaper didn't even know he was there, because Powell's not the type to be like, "Hey, I'm Arthur Powell, the guy that jumped on U-94." He just keeps to himself.
Well, in the heat of the moment, you never know how you're going to react, do you?
Well, I imagine being it's the amount of times they didn't. Geez, the fact that even from friendly fire, which I always find is a really odd wording, that both of them, and certainly Lawrence was nearly cut down by his own machine gun fire, and he knows who the machine gunners are, right? I put it in the book, and he's like, damn it, to their name. But they got spooked. They heard a bang, and they thought oh, the U-boat's firing at us again. Jeez, good Lord, confusion and messy.
Well, that looks like it for the questions. So anyway, thank you again, Sean. It was a really terrific presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, listen, you really brought it to home, I'll tell you. Now, at this time, I usually present you with a gift of appreciation from RCMI, but we'll have to let Canada Post do the job for us. So,
of course, that's understandable.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure organizing and having you here as a speaker. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
And good luck with all your, for the future.
Well, stay tuned. There is another, I got another bit of naval history that people don't know about that is incredible, that will be coming soon, but you'll have to wait to find out.
All right. Well, we'll stay in touch.
Good. I hope so.
Now, this time, I would like to thank the behind-the-scenes team at RCMI for their support and expertise, without which this presentation would not happen. And a very special thank you to Tanuja, our Zoom host, and Eric Morse, who, along with his numerous RCMI responsibilities, produces RCMI event videos. And I thank you all very, very much. I've got one announcement to make. The next Military History Night is scheduled for June the 22nd, and speaker is Captain Retired Mort Lightstone, and his topic is the military in the Arctic, which should be, a very, very interesting presentation also. And now, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation. I now declare this meeting ended. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Pat. Good night.
Good night.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.